Hey, what's going on everybody? It's your boy Hitty's Thoughts here, and in today's video I want to talk about Ataraxian, specifically Valmalkea, which is the first biome for the Ataraxian series, which is Pearl Abyss's first dungeon that they've ever done, and it was released on the entire Black Desert game, not just for console. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about things like what my thoughts were on the dungeon itself, like my experience. I want to talk about things that they did wrong. I want to talk about things that they did right. Maybe some talk about what they could have done better. This is just based on my opinion from my experience when I did it. And I probably should have put this video out a little while ago, but with the release of the second biome, I felt like now was the perfect time to do it and kind of just talk about the first one and let's see what we can do. I will be passing this video on to Pearl Abyss as well so that they can review it, and maybe this video helps make some improvements for future players. But guys, yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell button so you get notified when future videos drop for Black Desert Console content. Appreciate you guys. Let's get into the video. Okay, so while we're watching this as well, you guys are going to be seeing footage in the background for when I actually did the dungeon. So I recorded all of it, and you guys are going to be able to see kind of like what I went through and what the experience was. You guys can see that for yourself. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is what I thought about the overall feel and the look of the dungeon. So, in true Pearl Abyss style, I feel like they did a really good job in the look and the feel of the dungeon, in regards to the level of detail, in regards to the sculptures of the rocks and the layout of the dungeon. I felt like they did a really good job. It all felt really nice and kind of fun, like just had a really fun feel to it, where you guys like had this like adventurous kind of feel to the dungeon, and I really liked that. So in terms of like the overall look and the feel of the dungeon, the level of detail and quality, I felt like they did a really good job. In regards to the monsters and stuff, all the monsters were really interesting as well, and I don't want to talk too much about like the puzzles and everything right now. We're going to get to that in a second, but in regards to like the way that the monsters were activated and everything like that, definitely like very creative, and the overall feel of the dungeon was very nice in my opinion. I think they did a really good job with that. That brings us on to our next part, which is what do I think about the objectives and the puzzles in the game. So with the objectives and the puzzles, you had to do specific things that required a lot of teamwork, and I really liked that. I felt like that's important when you're doing a dungeon, is having teamwork, having a lot of communication with your team. Your team needs to be on the level. Everybody needs to like play their part. And that's really good, and Pearl Abyss did a really good job injecting that into Ataraxian. So I take my hat off to them for that. In terms of the puzzles were all kind of like pretty interesting. A couple of them were pretty easy, but overall, I felt like the whole like requiring your team to be a part of something and requiring your team to have a specific role and do specific things, I definitely feel like that was really, really good, and really they did a really good job with that. So in regards to the objectives and the puzzles specifically, really good job. What do I think about the difficulty of the dungeon? This is where my opinions get a little bit, well, I don't want to say negative. I just want to say I have a very strong opinion about this. So the base requirements for Ataraxian Valmalkea, I'm not talking about seasons. I know seasons is different. The reason I don't want to talk about season is because the season doesn't run for 52 weeks of the year. So you've got a season for 3 months, and then you might not have another season for a month, 2 months, 3 months, right? Which means that anyone who's joining the game in between seasons isn't going to be able to experience Ataraxian as a new player. So this is why I'm only focusing on Ataraxian with normal gear, not including season. We have was 250 AP and 300 DP. I went in there the first time with 270 AP and 300 DP. The second time I went in there with, that was with Nuva. Then I went in there with 258 AP Kudum and 311 DP. Both times, actually the second time around with more DP, for some, I don't know why, but for some reason I found it way more difficult and I died way more. So I went in there with essentially the requirements that they recommend you use. Now, the actual requirements to do this is probably more along the lines of 280 AP and 320, 330 DP. This is the requirements that you really, realistically need to do this dungeon. And I feel like it's completely just way out of the ballpark. Like, when I've got people coming to me and messaging me and saying that they're quitting the game because the game doesn't have a dungeon, I said, okay, I understand. Then Pearl Abyss introduces a dungeon into the game. Everybody jumps for joy. I start messaging people going, hey, letting you know there's dungeons coming to Black Desert, like in case you ever decide to come back to the game. I know you didn't want to play the game for this particular reason, but now you might have a reason to come back and play, right? I've actually been messaging people and telling people these things prior to Ataraxian release. Then you play it and you realize that the gear requirements for Ataraxian for Valmalkea was ridiculous, right? To get the actual, so the gear requirements, 250 AP, 300 DP, in my opinion, it's, unless you want to play the dungeon for 10 hours straight and die 100,000 times, yeah, you might be able to complete the dungeon. But if you want to do it smoothly and in a relatively nice pace and without too much stress of dying over and over and over again, you need massive amounts of gear. 280 AP, 320, 330 DP minimum, right? This is my opinion on it. And I don't feel like this is very realistic for players, especially not new players. What I think they missed out on was an opportunity to create an entry-level dungeon. You've got 4 or 5 biomes. The second one's been released, which is the underwater biome. And then you've got, I think, 2 or 3 more to come. They missed a massive opportunity to create an entry-level dungeon for new players. To say that you've got a dungeon in the game and then a new player needs to come in and they need to spend months grinding gear just so they can go and do the dungeon, I feel like it's a massive waste of an opportunity. What they should have done is they should have created this dungeon with an entry level of 170, 180, 190 AP and maybe a DP requirement of 250. For the most part, the monsters are killable and you can, once you learn their mechanics and everything, you can get through them relatively easily. The problem was like the boss stages. You know, once you get to the stage where you've got this open area, you've got the squares above that when you walk under them, it sets off a reaction. More monsters appear. On top of that, you've got the birds in the sky that are like shooting things at you, and then you've got the bosses to deal with, which can spawn not just 1 but like 2 at a time, maybe even more. And you're trying to deal with all of this at the same time. It's too much, right? For the gear that we had, everyone that was in my party had the gear requirements, except for 2 people I think were over 600 gear score, and it was too much. And I'm not saying that it's not a good thing. It's good to have a challenge. But I just feel like it was a massive waste of an opportunity to create an entry-level dungeon for people to enjoy. If people want to come into Black Desert and they're a new player and they want to try different terms of content, and then they go, oh, well, we've got a dungeon. We'd really like to try a dungeon. But sorry, you got to wait. You've got to play the game for 3 to 6 months to get your gear up so that you can actually play the dungeon. Like, I feel like that's wrong. And I know that Pearl Abyss doesn't, with Black Desert specifically, they like to make things difficult and they like to make things a challenge and they like to make people work for a reward. But they really should have thought about this a little bit more and created an entry level dungeon, and they missed that. I can't comment on the difficulty of the second one as I haven't tried it yet. I have had reports from people close to me that it is very easy on seasons, so there's that to go off. But again, season and non-season are completely different, and they're not really relatable in any way. So I can't comment on the second one, which is Sakrakia. Alright, so now I want to talk about performance. Now, I know that there's been a lot of talk about performance with the game specifically lately. For me personally, I'm playing on a PlayStation 4. I have a 1TB Kingston SSD with nothing on it except Black Desert. And once I got to one of the final stages before the last room where the boss is in, my game basically became unplayable. I actually asked the people on the playing on PlayStation 5s or the newer gen consoles if they were getting the same thing, and they said no. So I don't know if it's just a PlayStation 4 thing, but you got to take into consideration as well the fact that Ataraxian is an individual instance. It's separate from the rest of the world of Black Desert and all the other people on all the other servers. So there really shouldn't be too much clutter on the server, on the specific server that you're on when you're doing the dungeon. Unless, of course, it's not an individual instance and it's just a room, and then it's still taking in massive amounts of data from other players outside of the dungeon, which probably shouldn't be, but it might be an option. My game was basically unplayable at this point. I couldn't walk in a straight line. I was skipping backwards and forwards. None of my attacks were connecting. I was trying to move away from monsters, and I was teleporting back in front of them over and over and over again until I died. It was unplayable. I thought it might have been also just like a one-time thing. Maybe it was like an internet connection problem, or maybe it was something else. But then on the second time around, I played the dungeon, and I had the exact same issue, except this time it wasn't at the second last stage of the dungeon. It was at the start, all the way through. Every time I was killing monsters from like in random spots, I started teleporting around. I couldn't do anything, and I knew that it wasn't just a one-time thing. This was an issue, either specifically because PlayStation 4 couldn't handle the dungeon, or there was something wrong with the servers or the game itself that's just not allowing PlayStation 4 to run the game. So it's hard for me to comment on the performance of the dungeon because I was experiencing things that next-gen players weren't. So I can't say that it's like an actual issue with the game and the performance of the dungeon isn't very good. I can't say that. All I can comment on my experience, which was really bad in terms of performance. I also know that there's been a lot of issues with Ataraxian since FSR was released. So that's something that needs to be looked at as well. But overall, I think for next-gen players, I think you guys can probably play this game, the dungeon, without too much issues with performance. I think generally you guys are pretty safe. For people that are on old-gen consoles, I would probably think about it a little bit, see how you go. Maybe maybe people on different consoles can get away with it. Now, in regards to the performance as well, I will be trying this again with this season, on this season character, and I already know that it's doable and it's way easier on season, so I'm not really going to be paying attention too much to the difficulty of it. What I will be paying attention to is just basically, can I complete it with the performance? We'll see how we go. I might update you guys a little bit later on that. But okay, guys, let's talk about what could have been done better. Again, this is all just my opinion. This could mean absolutely nothing, but just my thoughts on the dungeon overall. In terms of like the look and the feel of the dungeon, again, I think they did a really good job. I don't really feel like they could have made any improvements there. So there's that. Next, I want to talk about performance. In terms of performance, I feel like they need to pay attention to the performance of the dungeon, especially with the AMD FSR, how that's affecting things, and maybe take a look at the performance of just the game overall. You guys can see in the videos like what my performance has been like. It's been pretty terrible. I don't know if other people have been experiencing this. No one that I've really seen has either come forward with their experience of Ataraxian on PS4. But I feel like just general performance of Black Desert as it is needs to be more of a priority, more of a concern, and more of like an urgent kind of thing that they're looking at. And Ataraxian shouldn't be any exception to that. Next is going to be the difficulty of the dungeon. Guys, just rethink about how you have done this. Rethink about, do you want this to be accessible to more players? Because at the moment, it's not accessible to realistically a good portion of the player base. When you've got people that can't play the dungeon because the gear requirement is just too high. I know that you guys say 250 AP, 300 DP. That's not the gear requirement. The gear requirement is more like 280 AP and 320, 330 DP minimum. And this is from experience. I know this, especially having people come to me saying that they've had a full party of people with over 620 gear score and still struggling to complete it. That's how I know that this is too hard. For the very first dungeon that you guys released, it's too hard. End of story. I really hope that you guys consider this and take what I'm saying into consideration. If anyone from Pelvis is actually watching this, that is. And maybe lower the gear requirement for the first dungeon, guys. That's all I'm saying, is take a look, make it more accessible to new players, lower the gear requirement by a lot, and have an entry level, make it an actual entry level dungeon. That's what it should have been, and I definitely feel like it was a major mistake. And the last one is, I actually think you guys should have more puzzles. Puzzles in dungeons are amazing. They're a lot of fun. Having to actually like think about what you're doing and getting your team to work together is awesome. It's so much fun, and I feel like you guys need more puzzles. Having like 3 or 4 puzzles in a dungeon, it's good, but it's kind of like not enough. You've got a lot of RNG drops from killing monsters, a lot of requirements that make you need to kill monsters and get an RNG drop to get a key. Kind of boring. The entire game works on RNG. I feel like if you had less RNG, less requirement to spend an hour killing monsters so that you could get X amount of drops, and then more time focusing on puzzles and teamwork and communication and interacting with people in your party, rather than just, okay, I've got my keys, who needs theirs? Like, I feel like if you had less of that, more puzzles, more teamwork, it would be way more fun than it already is. Overall, in terms of puzzles, I think you guys did a good job. I just think maybe put some more in. So that's pretty much my thoughts of Ataraxian. I don't really have too much else to say about it. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have anything to add in regards to your experience. I'm curious to hear everybody's feedback about Valmalkea. We're specifically talking about Valmalkea, but if you guys want to include your feedback on Sakrakia, if you guys have done it yet, I'd appreciate some feedback as well. But I just want to say thank you guys for watching. Hopefully Pelvis see this, and hopefully it has some kind of positive influence on the dungeon itself. But yeah, appreciate you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.